Well, let's rewind a bit. Pascal said that the operations should be outside in, and he's right. But it only works if the in bit works properly. So what I'm going to be talking about, what I was going to be talking about actually, was life in a post-outsourcing world. Just around the audience here, can I see a show of hands for anyone who has outsourced or is outsourcing of any of their operations currently? Fair few. And show of hands for any organizations that are currently implementing, not POC, but implementing robotic process automation. Okay, about the same. Okay. Outside in. Why now? If you look at operational excellence, that is the way that organizations are driving, your organizations are driving activity that is benefiting customers. In order for that to work, you need a slick operation. Now, there are 1,800 shared service operations across Europe. 80% of those do not have a single instance of ERP, which means you've got people manually transferring information through and between multiple systems. Ultimately, the raison d'etre of a CIO is to create a bright, shiny new system with straight-through processing. And if you've got that, you do not need robots. But the vast majority of organizations do not. RPA is growing very fast indeed. 140% compound annual growth rate. Actually, I cheat. That's not the growth rate of RPA. That is actually the growth rate of steam power from 1800 to 1815. What we're seeing here is not new. We're seeing very rapid, almost explosive growth in RPA, but it's not new. In fact, Sarah Burnett of Everest calculated that the CAGR growth for RPA is about 90% over the next 2 or 3 years. We personally have grown by 400% last year, and we've already doubled what we did last year in the first 5 months of this year. So we're growing relatively quickly. Why? It's because RPA is driven by changes in 3 things. Changes in the technology. Automation has been around for decades. Screen scraping, macros, all of the things that your IT departments and your analysts have been working on. The difference is now that RPA is able to do unattended work. It can replace the manual labor where your people are transferring information through and between those systems. There's been a change in the mentality of services. Services have become more and more mature. Shared services started off about 20 years ago. That's matured into captive operations, offshoring, into global business service units, and all of those organizations now see automation as the next logical step in their evolution. And finally, there's a change in the mentality. When automation started, our competitors are Automation Anywhere and Blue Prism. When Blue Prism created the RPA market in about 2003, they were founded in 2002. In about 2003, they created RPA, they defined what it was, and they said you need to automate end-to-end. But actually, as people realize that automation, RPA, can be used in bits of the business, bits of the process, and you still achieve hundreds of % of ROI in the first year, that's what organizations are doing. There was a video I was showing outside of a bit of work we did for BMW. There was a piece in there, in that process, that took about 25 minutes of work to do, where the BMW had to identify whether the person that was joining them could work in Germany. It was interns. That was not automatable. But we could automate the front bit, which was manually transferring information from the customer, from the intern, and loading it onto the HR system. And then we automated the back end, which was the loading all that stuff onto SAP. Now, it's a very simple process, but it's a good example. So even that time was reduced down to 2 minutes, even with that manual process. Human in the loop, as WorkFusion call it, still in there. So change in technology, change in services, and change in mentality. So I saw quite a few hands going up when they said that, when you said that you're implementing RPA. In actual fact, 5%. This comes from Kathy Tornbaum of Gartner. 5% of global organizations in excess of $1 billion have implemented RPA. Now, She thinks that that number is going to be between 15 and 18% within 12 to 15 months. Why is that important? It's because if anyone's read Crossing the Chasm, that's when it becomes mainstream. So the early adopters sitting in this audience will then be gathered by all of you. There was a phrase yesterday that came up. It said that 10 years ago, and this was related to machine learning actually, but just applicable to RPA, 10 years ago, it would have been difficult to find 10 companies that were working on machine learning. In 10 years' time, it will be difficult to find 10 that aren't. That's the potential for the growth. But what really matters is there's only 4 things, really. Breadth. How many processes can you automate? Velocity. How fast can you automate those processes? Agility. What happens when things change? Particularly if you're operating over Citrix, where all you're seeing is a bitmap. You haven't got access to the underlying application. And security, which is the table stakes for operating in this space. For us, we always recommend that you use a partner to help you implement. The early iterations of RPA stalled for exactly the reason that Pascal said. It was done in silos. It was someone fixing the problem that they had, and then it stalled. Nothing else happened. The advantage of using a consulting company, a system integrator, or even an outsourcer to help you with your RPA journey is that they can accelerate your time to value. They can help you build your center of excellence. They can train up your people so that you become self-sufficient. But this is a slide that I did originally in February in America. And it's always the case when, so I'm standing right in the middle here. It's always the case that when you stand in front of a slide like that, people come and take photographs. It ends up on Twitter. Very deliberately, I believe that our offshoring is dead. If you look at NASCOM, which took place in February, they were worried about 2 things. One was automation, and the other one was Trump. If you look at Infosys, announced today that they're looking at a reduction of between 30 and 40% in their growth rate. In fact, they defined it as, just to get the phrase right, degrowth, a significant period of degrowth, which I love. Offshoring as a business model of labor arbitrage, doing stuff cheaper in overseas locations is absolutely over. Absolutely over. Because if you think back 15 years ago, 20 years ago when offshoring first started, and by the way, most of it was my fault. I worked with a consulting company that suggested organizations do it. 15 years ago, someone sitting in Mumbai as opposed to Manchester was a third of the cost. Not now. They've moved to tier 3 cities, places like Shimoga. And by the way, I define a tier 3 city as having a university but no airport. So you can train people up, but they can't escape. Those tier 3 organizations, those tier 3 cities for either your shared service, captive operations, or indeed for outsourcing organizations, are now being replaced by robots. Robots is a third of the cost, even in a managed service perspective, of an offshore resource. And they will do the work of between 3 and 5 people. So therefore, you're looking at a minimum of a 9x improvement per dollar, yen, or euro spent. But it's advancing as well. So RPA is really, really good at doing the stuff that humans currently do in offshore locations. Manually transferring information from operation to system to system. Really good at that. But it has to be structured data, and it has to be rules-based. Cognitive and AI, which we've heard a lot about over the last couple of days, that's about unstructured data. That is about semi-structured data. That's about invoices coming in from 100,000 different suppliers, all in a different format. There is only one organization in the world that mandates exactly what sort of format the invoice has got to be in, and that's Walmart. Everyone else is having to deal with that semi and unstructured data. That's where cognitive and AI comes in. We did work with Celoton. Celoton's a British company, very good. It operates entirely over the cloud, so it's difficult for those that are highly regulated, and they have to do their own implementation. Now we're working with Abby, that's ABBYY. They were originally an OCR business. They've cracked the semi and unstructured data model. What that means is that it doesn't matter what format that invoice comes in, they will scan it in, turn that unstructured, semi-structured data into structured data, fed straight into our robots. But it's not only that type of activity. What we're seeing is that cognitive and AI tools are being developed by the big guys, by the Microsofts, by the Googles, by the IBMs. IBM Watson, for instance, has 40 APIs that we're now feeding into. So Swiss Re, one of our big insurance clients, has IBM Watson on-prem, first time ever, because Watson's expensive enough in the cloud, let alone on-prem. It's feeding our robots. So if we go back to the breadth, velocity, agility, and security stuff, these are some of the things that we're working on. And I won't bore you to death with some of them, but predictive analytics. Within our server product, we've got predictive analytics baked in, so you can start to do some of the analytics on the fly. Now, if you're in a highly regulated environment, so a bank, financial services, or insurance, then this is really, really important because it helps you meet your regulatory requirements by accident, for free, because that's just the way the robots work. In fact, we originally went to the banks and said, we can reduce the cost of your back office operations and increase the efficiency. And they said, great, go away, come back in 6 months, we're busy. So I went to see the SEC, I went to see the FCA, and said, why are they not interested in it? Because it helps. And they said they're only interested in working on things that actually help us stop finding them, basically. So we changed the conversation. We said, actually, this RPA stuff can help you meet your regulatory requirement. And we've won 5 banks in the last 2 months as a result of that. Other things we're working on. We have, if you go and see our little video, our demo, the bit of software that sits on the user's desktop is called Studio. And that uses recorders to record their actions. That creates a script, because our entire platform is built on .NET, Workflow Foundation, actually. And so, therefore, it's very intuitive. It's no code or low code. But what we're now building is self-learning robots, self-building robots. So the software will sit on the user's desktop, and it will create its own process, and will create a robot that will do that task. We're about a year out, 18 months out from that. The way you communicate with the robots as well is changing. So we're now working on chatbots as a way. So if those invoices that come in and the robot doesn't understand it, then we will say, you will type initially, and then it will be voice. Say, well, okay, robot, if you see that sort of invoice, then stick it in bucket A. And the robot goes, okay, got that, and then it remembers it for the next time. So that machine learning is being baked in. And remember that as it's the big guys that are producing these type of tools, one of the big advantages of having an open platform, which I'll come to in a minute, is that you can build your own IP on top. It also means that as these cognitive and AI tools become available, then we'll just bake them into the platform, and you'll get them at no cost. So the extensions, that didn't come out right, the extensions around this are that type of activity. So you've got the core platform, then we've got the extensions around it, and that's larger scale deployments. So you can automate more processes. It's the Holy Grail, the combination of RPA and AI and cognitive. My final slide. Actually, this has got nothing to do with RPA. Any successful software business needs 2 things. Firstly, it needs to be an open platform, as I mentioned. You need to be able to build, our partners and you, the customers, need to be able to build your own intellectual property on top. And secondly, it needs a community of people who want to make the product better, who can evangelize about it. So we've currently got about 13,000 developers around the world using UiPath within your organizations and others. I'm expecting that number to be over 100,000 by the end of this year. Why? Because earlier in March, we developed a MOOC, a massive open online course. It's called UiPath Academy, and you can train up all of your teams on RPA for free. So Deloitte, for instance, is training up all of their risk advisory people and all of their consultants in the UK on UiPath, because it just becomes a standard part of the way that they work. That's 5,000 people. Generali, one of our big insurance clients, has 306 green and black belts who run their operational excellence teams, all of those people have been trained up so that it just becomes a standard part of what they're doing. So that was it for me. Anyone questions, then that's my email address. I'm also on Twitter, at Guy Kirkwood. Pascal mentioned, my last thing I'd say, Pascal mentioned about getting the balance right between front, middle and back office. And actually, we're not using those terms. We're talking about attended robots and unattended robots, operations. What HFS are talking about, Horses for Sources, run by Phil Furst, is talking about one office. And actually, that's a very good way of thinking about it. So you're breaking down the silos that Pascal mentioned so that your operations are slick through and through. And I would suggest that you might want to look at RPA, not necessarily from us, but from Blue Prism or Automation Anywhere. But have a look at it. Thank you very much indeed.